It was a sweltering summer afternoon in the upscale suburban neighborhood of Willow Creek. The air shimmered with heat over pristine lawns and sparkling pools, and the local community prided itself on maintaining an impeccable image. In one particularly lavish home, Karen Davis, self-appointed guardian of proper decorum and an unwavering believer in our way, stood by her manicured front lawn, glaring across the street. Her eyes had fixed on something that, to her, was an outrage. A black man, Marcus Carter, was leisurely enjoying a swim in his own pool. Karen's heart pounded with indignation as she watched Marcus splash about with a carefree smile. To her, his very presence was a violation of the neighborhood's unwritten rules, a disruption of the order she thought she was duty-bound to enforce. Without a moment's hesitation, Karen whipped out her cell phone and dialed 911. In a voice heavy with self-righteous authority, she reported, "There's a black man in that pool, and he's causing a disturbance. I demand that he be removed immediately from his own property." Her tone, dripping with contempt, echoed across her perfectly trimmed yard. Neighbors peered from behind drawn curtains and manicured hedges, their eyes narrowing in curiosity and, for some, a shared sense of superiority. Karen was convinced that she was defending the sanctity of the neighborhood, a community where she believed only certain people could behave in a proper manner. Within minutes, the sound of sirens cut through the thick, humid air. A police cruiser pulled up to the curb near Marcus's property. Karen's face lit up with smug satisfaction, believing that justice was on her side. But what happened next would shatter her expectations entirely. Officer Daniel Roberts, a seasoned member of the local police force, stepped out of the cruiser. As he approached the pool area, Karen watched intently, anticipating that he would corroborate her story. In a matter-of-fact tone, Officer Roberts began questioning Marcus about the disturbance. Then, as if to confirm Karen's biased claim, Marcus calmly replied that he was simply enjoying a swim in his own pool. No disturbance, no misbehavior at all. Karen's eyes widened with shock, but she was not prepared for what came next. In an unexpected twist, Officer Roberts, after a brief pause and a quick check of official records, informed Karen that Marcus was indeed the rightful owner of the property and that his conduct was entirely within his rights. Even more surprisingly, the officer sided with her complaint, not out of bias, but because the report indicated that Karen's repeated calls in the past had prompted similar investigations that revealed troubling patterns of harassment. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still for Karen. Her call had been answered, and not in the way she had anticipated. As murmurs rippled through the small gathering of onlookers, the scene set the stage for a dramatic collision of preconceived notions and the harsh reality of justice. Karen's eyes, once blazing with self-assured superiority, now burned with a dawning realization. The very system she trusted to enforce order was about to expose her own deep-rooted prejudice. Willow Creek was a neighborhood that prided itself on its outward perfection. The streets were lined with towering oak trees, the lawns meticulously mowed, and the homes showcased the latest in upscale design. Residents spent their weekends hosting barbecues and pool parties, and there was an unspoken expectation that every family adhered to a certain standard of behavior. In this environment, appearances were everything, and any deviation from the norm was met with swift, sometimes harsh, judgment. Karen Davis was one of those residents who had built her identity around the preservation of this order. In her early 50s, with her platinum blonde hair perfectly styled and her designer clothes always immaculate, Karen saw herself as the custodian of Willow Creek's values. She was known for her willingness to speak out when things did not go her way, and her frequent calls to the authorities about perceived disturbances were legendary. Though what she considered disturbances often turned out to be nothing more than the harmless actions of those who did not fit her narrow view of propriety. Across the street lived Marcus Carter, a man whose life story was as complex as it was inspiring. In his late 40s, Marcus had earned his place in the community not through flamboyance or ostentation, but through quiet perseverance and hard work. A self-made entrepreneur, he had purchased his home with a promise to himself that he would always provide a safe, comfortable space for his family. His pool, a sparkling oasis set against a backdrop of lush landscaping, was a symbol of his hard-won success and a personal retreat where he could unwind from the demands of his busy life. Marcus carried himself with a quiet dignity. His manner was unassuming, his voice gentle, and his eyes reflected the wisdom that came from overcoming obstacles that many could scarcely imagine. For him, the pool was more than just a luxury. It was a sanctuary, a place where he could enjoy the simple pleasure of a summer day without the burden of judgment. The setting for the unfolding drama was a picturesque cul-de-sac in Willow Creek, where every house was a testament to the community's commitment to excellence. Neighbors would often be seen tending to their gardens, children played on the sidewalks, and there was an underlying current of unity, at least until someone dared to challenge the status quo. On that fateful day, the contrast between Karen's rigid worldview and Marcus's quiet confidence was about to be starkly revealed. As Karen stood in her immaculately kept yard, phone pressed tightly to her ear, she watched Marcus methodically secure his pool gate. Unaware of her scrutiny, Marcus was simply performing a routine task, one that had nothing to do with causing any disturbance. Yet, to Karen, it was a symbol of everything she despised, a defiance of the norms she believed were sacrosanct. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation. The juxtaposition of Karen's haughty indignation against Marcus's calm, measured actions underscored a deep societal divide, a divide that had been widening with every misguided 911 call and every whispered remark in the corridors of Willow Creek. It was in this neighborhood, where every detail of appearance was scrutinized and every action judged by its conformity to tradition, that the seeds of change were about to be sown. As the police cruiser arrived and Officer Roberts began his inquiry, the tension in the neighborhood grew palpable. Neighbors peered out from behind curtains and gathered discreetly on sidewalks, their expressions a mix of curiosity and disapproval. For many, this was more than just a dispute over a pool gate. It was a clash of values, a moment when the true measure of character would be revealed. And as the wheels of fate began to turn, both Karen and Marcus were about to face the consequences of their actions in ways they never imagined. Within moments of Karen's heated 911 call, the calm of Willow Creek was shattered. Officer Roberts arrived on the scene with a measured pace, his eyes scanning the surroundings as he approached Marcus's property. "Sir, can you explain what happened?" he asked in a professional tone. Marcus, undisturbed by the chaos, replied simply, "I'm just closing my pool gate, officer. Everything is fine." His words were calm, almost routine, so ordinary that they highlighted the absurdity of the complaint. Across the street, Karen stood in her front yard, her face contorted with a mix of anger and self-righteous indignation. Clutching her phone tightly, she repeated her account to the dispatcher, insisting that the sight of Marcus in his own pool was a deliberate affront to the neighborhood standards. "He's making a scene in his own home," she declared, convinced that her intervention was necessary to preserve the order she so valued. As Officer Roberts reviewed Marcus's explanation and cross-checked the property records on his mobile device, the digital evidence began to tell a different story. The security camera footage from a nearby home, long installed as a precaution in the upscale community, clearly captured Marcus's actions, a smooth, methodical closing of an automated pool gate, with no sign of disturbance or misbehavior. The footage, when shared among the responding officers, left little room for doubt. News of the incident quickly spread among the residents of Willow Creek. Neighbors began whispering about the absurdity of the complaint and the inappropriate use of 911 services. "I can't believe someone would call the police over a closed pool gate," one resident murmured as he sipped his morning coffee on his porch. Others, however, seemed to share Karen's sentiment, clinging to an outdated belief that certain people should behave in a prescribed manner. The tension escalated further when Officer Roberts, having verified Marcus's rightful ownership and the legitimacy of his actions, informed Karen that there was no disturbance at all, only a misunderstanding fueled by her personal bias. But instead of tempering her anger, Karen's indignation deepened. "This is exactly what I feared," she shouted into her phone. convinced that the authorities were complicit in upholding an unjust system. Her words, filled with frustration and unyielding prejudice, rang out across her neatly kept lawn. Meanwhile, Marcus continued his routine, undeterred by the drama unfolding across the street. His neighbors, some supportive and others silently judgmental, watched as the scene grew more charged with every passing minute. Digital recordings of the incident soon began circulating on social media, and hashtags such as #JusticeForMarcus started trending in local online communities. The incident, which had begun as a petty misuse of emergency services, was now a symbol of the deep-seated cultural divide that had long festered in Willow Creek. As the internal investigation unfolded, more disturbing details came to light. Several residents recalled previous 911 calls made by Karen, calls that had targeted individuals based on their race or perceived lack of conformity. The pattern was undeniable. Karen's calls were less about actual disturbances and more about enforcing a narrow, prejudiced view of what the community should be. The mounting evidence began to erode the credibility of her complaints, and many in the community started questioning the legitimacy of her actions. At the same time, whispers of support for Marcus grew louder. He was just doing what any responsible homeowner would do. One onlooker commented, his voice tinged with admiration. The digital evidence, combined with a growing chorus of voices demanding accountability, transformed the incident from a minor dispute into a battleground for social justice. Officer Roberts, tasked with compiling his report, noted every detail in his log. The exact time Marcus closed his gate, the clear footage from the security camera, and even the exact words Karen had uttered. His meticulous documentation became a crucial piece of evidence that would later be scrutinized by both the local authorities and community watchdogs. As the day wore on and the tension reached a boiling point, the incident became a focal point of heated debate at neighborhood meetings and online forums. People discussed the incident with fervor, sharing their own experiences of bias and injustice. The community was split. Some clung to the old ways, insisting that order must be maintained at all costs, while others saw in Marcus's dignified response a shining example of quiet strength and integrity. By the close of the day, the conflict had evolved from a single 911 call to a full-blown confrontation over community values. The digital evidence was irrefutable, and the growing outcry demanded that the deeper issues of prejudice be addressed. In that moment, the stage was set for a dramatic escalation, one that would force Willow Creek to confront the outdated notions of who belonged and who did not, and to re-examine the true meaning of community injustice. In the days following the incident, Willow Creek was alive with controversy. Social media platforms buzzed with the video footage, and hashtags such as #JusticeForMarcus and #NoTo911Hate spread quickly. Neighbors, once divided by subtle differences, now found themselves united in a call for accountability. The incident had become more than just an isolated misuse of emergency services. It had grown into a symbol of the deep-seated biases that many in the community had long ignored. Local news outlets picked up the story, and soon, interviews with residents filled television screens. A particularly moving segment featured a longtime neighbor who recounted, "I've seen Marcus around for years. He's one of the kindest, most hard-working people in Willow Creek. To see him targeted like this is a slap in the face to everything we stand for." The emotional testimony resonated with many, and public opinion began to shift. Within the police department, the internal investigation was given top priority. Officer Roberts, whose report now included detailed digital evidence and multiple eyewitness accounts, presented his findings to senior officials. The data revealed a disturbing pattern. This was not the first time that Karen Davis had used the 911 system to enforce her narrow view of the community. Previous calls, now brought to light by the digital evidence, painted a picture of a resident who had long harbored deep-rooted prejudice. The internal affairs team was swift to act, and discussions of disciplinary measures began to circulate among the higher ranks. Across the neighborhood, community leaders and civil rights organizations organized public forums and peaceful protests. At one rally outside the local community center, demonstrators held signs reading, "Our homes, our rights, and justice for all." A passionate speech by a local activist declared, "We will not allow hate to dictate who belongs in our community." Today, we stand together to demand accountability and to ensure that every resident is treated with the dignity they deserve. The energy of the protest was palpable, a collective call to dismantle the outdated hierarchies that had long divided Willow Creek. Meanwhile, the digital evidence continued to spread, further discrediting Karen's account. Videos showing Marcus's calm and routine actions, juxtaposed against Karen's hysterical phone call, were shared thousands of times. Social media users marveled at how something as mundane as closing a pool gate could be twisted into an act of supposed disturbance. The hashtag #RealAction soon dominated local feeds, as people celebrated Marcus's dignified response and decried the misuse of 911 for personal vendettas. In the midst of the escalating tension, a series of town hall meetings were organized by the city council. Residents were given the opportunity to voice their opinions on how emergency services should be managed and how to prevent such biased calls from disrupting the peace. Heated debates ensued, with some defending the traditional values that had long governed Willow Creek and others demanding a more inclusive, fair approach. "We must learn from this incident," one council member asserted, "and ensure that no one is allowed to weaponize our emergency systems to enforce their own prejudices." The pressure on Karen Davis began to mount. Neighbors who had once quietly admired her adherence to community norms now started to question the validity of her repeated 911 calls. Private conversations revealed that many had grown tired of the constant disruptions and the narrow-mindedness that seemed to pervade her actions. Digital archives uncovered previous incidents where her calls had led to unwarranted investigations, each one reinforcing the narrative of a resident driven more by bias than by any genuine concern for public safety. As the internal investigation gathered momentum, the tension reached a critical juncture. The police department announced that the complete report, detailing every instance of biased behavior by Karen Davis, would be made public. The announcement sent shockwaves through Willow Creek, with local media and community forums erupting in discussion. "This is about more than one incident," an editorial in the local newspaper declared. "It's about holding our community to a higher standard, where every individual's rights are respected regardless of their background." The public's demand for reform was now undeniable. Amid this rising storm, Marcus Carter remained a quiet pillar of strength. His daily routine continued uninterrupted, his focus on his family and his own work a testament to his resilience in the face of injustice. Yet, every encounter, every supportive message on social media reinforced his belief that dignity and hard work would ultimately prevail. The incident had transformed from a moment of personal humiliation into a symbol of the community's broader struggle against prejudice. By the end of the week, the digital evidence, the town hall discussions, and the passionate public outcry had combined to create an environment of intense pressure. The stage was set for a dramatic turning point, a moment when the collective weight of truth and accountability would force a change that none could ignore. The once idyllic streets of Willow Creek were now the backdrop for a movement that demanded justice and the dismantling of outdated, biased notions of who belonged in the community. The decisive moment arrived on a cool, crisp morning in a packed community boardroom at the Willow Creek Town Hall. Senior city officials, local police representatives, community leaders, and media personnel had gathered to hear the final resolution of the investigation into the 911 call made by Karen Davis. With a calm but determined demeanor, Councilwoman Evelyn Carter stepped up to the podium, a figure of authority whose voice resonated with both compassion and resolve. After an exhaustive review of digital records, security footage, and countless eyewitness testimonies, we have reached an unequivocal conclusion. Councilwoman Carter began, her tone firm and unwavering. It is clear that the 911 call made by Mrs. Karen Davis was not based on any legitimate disturbance, but was, in fact, an act driven by deep-seated prejudice. This call was an abuse of our emergency services, a misuse that undermines the very fabric of our community. Her words fell heavy in the silent room, each syllable underscoring the gravity of the situation. She continued, effective immediately, Mrs. Davis's history of discriminatory 911 calls will be subjected to a full disciplinary review, and we will take all necessary measures to ensure that no one in Willow Creek is ever allowed to use our public resources to enforce their narrow, biased views. As her statement echoed through the room, there was a palpable shift in the atmosphere, a collective recognition that the time for unchecked bias had come to an end. At that moment, a representative for the affected party, a dignified black homeowner who had long been a pillar of the community, rose to speak. I stand before you as a voice for every resident who has been marginalized by prejudice, he said, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. Today, we demand that every act of bias, no matter how small, be met with swift and decisive accountability. Our community deserves better than a system that tolerates hate. His words were met with a thunderous round of applause, as every person in the room felt the power of his declaration. Following this, a senior police official presented the final dossier, a meticulously compiled record of internal logs, video evidence, and witness statements that painted an irrefutable picture of Karen Davis's biased behavior. Every piece of evidence confirmed what the community had long suspected, that her 911 calls were not isolated incidents, but part of a persistent pattern of discrimination. The Internal Affairs panel unanimously supported the decision for strict disciplinary action. The turning point was sealed as Councilwoman Carter concluded. Today, we reclaim the integrity of our community. We say that no one, regardless of their position or personal beliefs, is above the law or entitled to use our services as a weapon against others. Let this be the moment when deep-rooted prejudice is met with the full force of accountability, and let our unity pave the way for a more inclusive future. Her words, delivered with unwavering conviction, resonated throughout the boardroom, marking the dawn of a new era for Willow Creek. In that charged moment, as the faces in the room reflected shock, determination, and hope, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The decision to subject Mrs. Davis to a full disciplinary review was more than a punitive measure. It was a clear statement that the community would no longer tolerate the abuse of public trust. Every eye in the room bore witness to a historic turning point, a moment when the collective will of Willow Creek rose to overcome the shadow of prejudice. In the weeks following the landmark decision, Willow Creek began a gradual but undeniable transformation. News of the disciplinary review into Karen Davis's repeated misuse of emergency services spread rapidly, igniting robust discussions about accountability and reform within the community. Local newspapers, social media platforms, and community meetings buzzed with stories of change, with many residents hailing the decision as a turning point in the fight against bias. The affected homeowners and community members found solace and strength in the knowledge that their voices had been heard. Public forums were organized where residents shared their experiences of injustice and collaborated on initiatives aimed at preventing future abuses of power. Our community has long suffered in silence, one local activist proclaimed at a town hall meeting. Today, we stand united to ensure that every call for help is treated with the respect and fairness that every citizen deserves. His impassioned words resonated with many, bolstering the collective resolve to create lasting change. Within the local police department, sweeping reforms were set in motion. Senior officials, including Director Samuel Green and Lieutenant Marcus Daniels, rolled out new training programs on cultural sensitivity and ethical conduct. Regular internal audits and transparent disciplinary procedures were introduced, ensuring that every complaint was investigated thoroughly and impartially. We must rebuild trust, not only in our system, but in our community, Lieutenant Daniels declared at a press conference, his words echoing the promise of a new era of accountability. Across Willow Creek, community leaders collaborated with local government to draft policies that would safeguard against the misuse of emergency services. Town hall meetings and public service campaigns emphasized the importance of respect, unity, and fairness in every aspect of community life. Banners with messages such as "Every Voice Matters" and "No to Prejudice" were displayed throughout the neighborhood, serving as daily reminders that change was not only possible, but already underway. For Karen Davis, the repercussions of her actions began to settle in as well. Isolated and facing the full weight of public scrutiny, she found herself forced to confront the consequences of her deep-rooted bias. The once proud calls she had made to 911 were now seen as a stain on the community's conscience, a legacy of prejudice that could no longer be ignored. While some of her longtime neighbors remained silent, many turned away in disappointment, their eyes reflecting the profound impact of the incident on their shared sense of justice. At a final celebratory event held in the Central Park of Willow Creek, community members, local officials, and police representatives gathered to mark the beginning of a new chapter. Under the soft, golden light of the setting sun, a large banner reading "Justice and Unity for All" was unfurled, and speeches filled the air with messages of hope and renewal. Today, we celebrate not just a victory over prejudice, but the promise of a future where every individual is valued for who they are, declared Councilwoman Thompson, her voice ringing out with conviction. The applause that followed was not just for the decision. It was for the collective journey toward a more inclusive, fair society. As Willow Creek slowly returned to its routine, the legacy of that fateful day endured. The incident, which had once threatened to tear the community apart, had instead become a catalyst for transformative change. It was a powerful reminder that the courage to stand against hate, when united by the truth, can reshape even the most entrenched systems of injustice. In the end, the story of that day, where a misguided 911 call, fueled by deep-seated prejudice, was exposed and dismantled by the unyielding force of accountability, became a beacon of hope for the entire community. Willow Creek emerged stronger, its people more determined than ever to uphold the values of fairness and unity. And as each new day dawned over the neighborhood, it carried with it the promise that true justice is built not on exclusion, but on the collective commitment to respect every individual.